In my Nothing Like a Good Book series with Mark Bishop, we have some very diverse topics and some soul-searching literature. As with my next author, a prominent businessman who decries the anti-Semitic movement and, as Ben and Jerry's redlines parts of Israel. We'll get into that. Contrary to popular belief, anti-Semitism did not die with the Nazi regime. As the conflict between Israel and Palestine continues, rejection of the Jewish right to self-determination, using Palestinian sympathies as an excuse for thinly veiled racism, has become more accepted, particularly in academic communities. So in the past 20 years, the BDS movement, boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel, that's what it stands for, BDS, has gained momentum, rejecting claims of anti-Semitism despite its targeted attack on Israel and its desire for the destruction of the Israeli state. A fact that most recently, and I would say disturbingly, Ben & Jerry's and its parent company Unilever has recently declared that it will no longer sell its products in Judea and Samaria. Now, to make sense of all of this and shine the spotlight on this topic is my very special guest, Scott A. Shay. He's a leading businessman, in fact, a chairman and co-founder of Signature Bank in New York City and throughout, and a thought leader, a distinguished leader in the Jewish community, and son of a Holocaust survivor as well. Welcome, Scott.
Mark, thank you for having me.
Well, this touched my heart a little. It's a dear story. Your book is going to be out soon. We'll talk about that. Conspiracy U. I tell you what, it's going to be a big seller, I think. You have spearheaded opportunities to foster awareness about the dangers of the BDS movement. You see, it's yet as another fragrant attack against Israel.
Yes, there's no question about it. Look, there are 100 disputed territories in the world today, and yet there's really, when you talk about BDS, boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning, only one country is targeted, the one Jewish majority country in the world. And the terms used for this BDS movement, again, targeted only against one nation in the world, are borrowed in many cases from South Africa, from the apartheid era, should I say. And that's what South Africa, the South African situation, and pre-Nelson Mandela South African situation and the Palestinian Israel situation couldn't be further from different. They are so different and diverse that it's really a shame to delegitimize the word apartheid by focusing it on Israel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it also, this effort of BDS to demonize and isolate and make Israel seem like it's some secret cabal of people trying to harm the rest of the world, doesn't promote peace. Rather, by demonizing a required party to peace, it makes the dream of peace so much further away.
What does BDS do as an organization then?
So if you look at BDS and what they advocate and the people who back it, they're pretty clear. They make up a lot of stuff about Israel and indeed the Jewish history that are simply entirely false. And some of these are basically conspiracy theories. If you would read the BDS literature or listen to any of the BDS folks, they would tell you that some Europeans of Jewish descent parachuted into what was Palestine in order to take over the place, that they were somehow European settler colonialists. So in order to believe that, you have to, first of all, believe that the Bible was entirely made up. Now, I'm not even talking about believing in God or not. I'm just talking about that it's entirely inaccurate. You'd have to believe that about the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures, and of course you'd have to believe that about the Roman historians.
Yeah, right. Throw them all in together. Why not? Mm-hmm.
So this notion that somehow Jews who really only have a serious history in most of Europe for 300 years, somehow originated there, is crazy. I mean, there's no question about one thing. The Israelites, the Jewish people, are the indigenous people in the area of Israel. Now, there's no question the Palestinians, too, have been there for many years, and they have historic rights. But to say that Israel is a colonial settler state is just false. Again, it takes terms and drains them of all meaning. And that's just not right. And these are propagated. These ideas, these falsehoods, are propagated as fact on universities. As a matter of fact, again, there's 100 disputed territories in the world, but there's only one week that BDS devotes to itself to, and that's Israel Apartheid Week. Yeah. And again, everything that one could say is bad is said about Israel.
Well, while BDS, they ardently deny that its sanctions are anti-Semitic and that their campaigns really only affect those who are strictly aiding the war effort against Palestine. And you say, Scott, this is clearly not the case.
There's no question it's not the case. As a matter of fact, it is. When you sit back and look at it, it's semi-ridiculous. I mean, Jews, for better or for worse, have been praying for a return to the land of Israel for 2,000 years. And again, even in the Bible, it goes back to the first exile was about 586 BC. And since then, Jews have wanted to go back. Whether you like that, you don't like that, you think that there shouldn't be an Israel, there should be an Israel. You shouldn't traffic in falsehoods. And yet, when you listen to what's going on and being said on campus, these are totally falsehoods. And the thing that makes it even more disturbing, frankly, and again, would not be acceptable for any other group on the planet, is that BDS thinks it has the right to define anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred, that somehow anything they do is okay because they've determined what anti-Semitism is, and that Zionists, as they say, are causing anti-Semitism. They're causing the harm to Jews who align with BDS. Now, just for 10 seconds, think about that. That is exactly the same as what people on the far right say about the Jews. The Jews are causing their own harm. Mm-hmm. The Jewish actions are causing their own harm. And one of the things that I do in my book, Conspiracy U, is I deeply read the far right and far left. And I show, and I think sometimes it's almost breathtaking how the far extremist left from conspiracy theories that are sort of descendants from actually Soviet conspiracy theories read almost identically with descendants of far-right neo-Nazi accusations against the Jews. And it's just remarkable.
Well, the book, of course, is Conspiracy U. Comes out in October. I was going to say, look, in my research, Scott, I found one of the most famous examples of anti-Semitic activity stemming from BDS sympathies happened back in 2018. That was when the University of Michigan associate professor there, John Cheney Lippold, I believe, he refused. Mm-hmm. He refused to write a letter of recommendation for a student when he discovered that the student's intent was to study in Israel. I mean, what happened then?
Well, let's just again parse this and see if this would be acceptable for any other identity group on the planet. Let's say that this person who asked Professor Cheney Lippold was from Myanmar, and that student wanted to study there. Would it even occur to him not to write a recommendation letter? Let's say that person was an ethnic Chinese person, and that he had just read an article about what's happening in the Xinjiang province with the Uyghurs who are being put into detention camps, or Hong Kong, or I could go on and on about the human rights abuses in China. What about Tibet? Of course, also a disputed territory. Would it even occur? What would the fallout have been to him or to anyone? Forget about personalizing it to this person, to anyone in any academic setting if they refuse to write a letter of recommendation for a student. And I mean, whatever happened to the golden rule? And part of the problem is that, and this is a serious problem, is that because academics are really focused on all of these overriding theories of how the world should work, they negate two things: facts right in front of them and people right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, to me, terribly troubling about the state of academia. And again, in my book, I go through where false theories negate facts, and false theories are used to actually legitimize harming people as opposed to harming individuals. There are also examples of student governments that sought to impeach students just because they were Zionists. The president of the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley was essentially fired, forced to resign because someone had found in his past that he was a Zionist, and he had, of course, admitted it. So that alone was enough to disqualify him for being president of the Graduate Theological Union. So you have these instances that are continuing on and on in academia that, again, would be acceptable for no other identity group.
Well, touching on the students, I mean, conduct, I think, like I mentioned from the Cheney Lippold scenario, I mean, it interferes, doesn't it, with students' opportunities, and it does violate, absolutely, their academic freedom. But more importantly, I think, as you bring up, it betrays our university's educational mission. And quite frankly, I think even more troubling, I nearly fell over when I got this one, in January, the investment from J Lens put a large Chicago-based investment research company on its do not invest list for anti-Jewish activities, and ties it to the BDS movement.
Well, I think this is a huge issue and this is an issue that there's something that your listeners may know, have heard of, ESG, Environmental Social Governance, which is a catchword now for a lot of investing, because people want to invest in a way that is socially acceptable and reflects their values, etc., which is, I'm all for it, and I think it's really good. But in some cases, and I identify in my book, there are investment firms that are using ESG, which again is supposed to be protective of climate change, make sure that there's full disclosure, a lot of important and good things, and that human rights are upheld, is being weaponized against Israel. Again, as you mentioned, in this particular case, they only really focused on two other places on the entire earth that frankly don't get much attention and are not all that controversial. So it's once again a singling out, which you would not be able to do of any other identity group.
That's
Here,
right.
because they are worried about the notion, they have at least the sense to recognize that if they just pick one, that maybe someone's going to call out to them because they're one step removed from academia, so they don't see the hypocrisy of singling one out. They came up with the brilliant idea of picking two other places, but they wanted to make sure, apparently, it seems that those weren't too problematic. So they picked two other areas, Western Sahara and Tibet, which, in all candor, don't get a lot of investment attention.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on an area there. I mean, imagine if you did that in China. I mean, they'd throw you in gulag, whatever, and string you up. So you're right. I mean, it's just not right. Now, by the way, folks, I'm speaking to Scott Shay. He's written two other books. What were those again, Scott?
Getting Our Groove Back, How to Energize American Jewry. So that book was focused on the Jewish community. And then my second book was focused on basically everybody. It's called In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, where I basically respond to Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and try to understand the questions of both and difficulties of both faith and non-faith.
Hmm. So, yeah, this isn't your first rodeo when it comes out, but it's going to be a terrific book. It's called Conspiracy U, and we'll talk about it, where you can buy it and so on. But just so, in case you've just tuned in, and I'm speaking with the co-founder, in fact, chairman and co-founder of Signature Bank in New York, Scott L. Shay. He earned a BA in economics and a master's in management from Northwestern University, a valuable experience due to the commitment of his professors to high academic standards and the ideals of the university's motto. So, what we were talking about there is, why should people care about the fact that Ben & Jerry's and its parent company Unilever has recently declared that it will no longer sell its products in Judea and Samaria?
Well, here's an example of a company that is trying to strangely virtue signal. I mean, again, I could have picked 100 territories in the world that are disputed. I could go into details about some of those territories. They could have picked China. They could have picked places where atrocities, South Sudan. They could have picked places where, frankly, there are atrocities going on today. But they only picked, again, one selective conflict, and then made a big deal of not selling there. When you again think about it, it is semi-ridiculous. And the chairman of the board there, because Ben & Jerry's are no longer involved, actually, and this has gotten some press, actually is a conflict because she heads a group that is focused on BDS, among other things. So there is, again, you wouldn't have, if there were that sort of even taint of self-interest or conflict when it came to Israel, you would have Israel and Jews be called out for trying to manipulate the system, trying to squash dissent, trying to do all sorts of things. But in the case where it's done to Israel, somehow it's all fine. It's all good. Whatever, and this is where it gets, and this is what academia unfortunately has been propounding, is that when it comes to Israel and Palestine, all you need to know is that Israel is all bad and Palestine is all good, and therefore, however or whatever you use in terms of efforts, words, or lies is just okay.
Yeah.
And that's deeply problematic because there's very little that doesn't have some nuance in the world. But in this particular conflict, nuance has gone to the graveyard.
Well, your new book, Conspiracy U, it takes a deep dive into anti-Zionism conspiracy theories. Let me ask you this, Scott. What is the difference between a theory about an actual conspiracy and a conspiracy theory?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think people don't focus on that. So there are real conspiracies in the world, and you can have a theory about them. You can investigate them. You can see if there's evidence for them. But when it comes to anti-Zionism, and which is a conspiracy theory, which is essentially mostly a conspiracy theory, these are generally theories that are that don't have evidence, and indeed, worse than not have evidence, they're non-falsifiable. So one professor who I write about in the book wrote a book denying the Holocaust. This is a tenured professor, and he wrote a book saying essentially the Holocaust was just a trumped up typhoid outbreak somewhere, and that really it was Zionists who caused the Holocaust. I didn't necessarily cause the Holocaust because he would argue not many Jews died, but caused the myth of the Holocaust. Confused people, gaslit the Germans who confessed, planted evidence, and so befuddled the judges at Nuremberg that they convicted innocent Germans. And then Germany was befuddled into paying Israel reparations. Then it goes on and on. Let me just say this. There's obviously no evidence for that, but what he says is that the absence of evidence just shows how good the Jews were at creating this conspiracy. So conspiracy theories generally are non-falsifiable.
Right.
I mean, the same thing goes for QAnon. The same thing goes for a lot of conspiracy theories too. You can never, whenever you come up with something that is a contradictory fact, well, what happens is that the conspiracy theorists say that's just a measure of where the bad guys messed up.
Right.
So that's what makes a conspiracy theory. It's made up, it's non-falsifiable, and there's one other thing that's important to understand. Virtually all conspiracy theories, not all, there's a few exceptions, but just about all have a political motivation. For example, the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory, that nothing happened at Sandy Hook.
Good Lord.
Well,
yeah.
That was made up by people who oppose gun control. Now, you can oppose gun control and you can argue for against gun control, but some people want to make up stories and it has a political motivation, and that's the evil part. Just like you can be against Israel or Zionism, but you shouldn't be making stuff up for politically motivated people for politically motivated purposes, and trying to have the unwitting or the naive or the easily susceptible people imbibe this stuff. It's really dangerous.
Sure is. And Scott, you also say that anti-Zionism is a mask, really, for anti-Jewish hatred. Can you explain to me, excuse me, if you would, I'm just getting over COVID, actually. If you'd explain to me, well, I'm very grateful I'm here, my listeners, how anti-Zionist conspiracy theories are another iteration of anti-Jewish hatred that has been pervasive over centuries and across cultures.
Oh, unfortunately, you can go back to the Romans, and when Josephus wrote against Appian, sadly wrote some of the things that could be written today at fancy universities in the United States, with the diatribes about Jews. And then he was talking about Jews living in Israel and Jews living in the area. So taking your listeners back a few hundred years, I mean, the Jews were demonized because of their religion.
Well, it always seemed as well. I mean, growing up as a kid for myself, just remembering things like people were always jealous to a degree because of the money. Jews worked very hard. I mean, let's take a big example. Israel was a mess. It was desert. Absolute desert. Nothing there, nothing done, and now it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And it develops some of the greatest tech and other business things ahead of the world. And look what they've done with the geography, the area, and everything included. Right? Now, others had a chance to do something, but they didn't. And the reality is, Jewish people tend to, from what I've seen and researched and worked with in my lifetime, they tend to work very hard, and they earn every darn penny they get. The biggest thing seems to be, I hate it when I hear it, but when people say, oh, I got Jewed down in the deal, I could have made more money, but, look, what I see is darn good business sense. And anybody does that anyway,
Well, I think that by and large, Jews are like everybody else. I think the Jewish people historically has had to work hard. We have a time. We've been, unfortunately, as a people, kicked out of many countries, been forced to emigrate, been forced to start again. And so there's some deep cultural DNA there. There are good Jews, and there are Jews who aren't so good. I mean, we're like everybody else, the Jews. And so, but what happens with anti-Semitism is that people have one bad experience with one Jew, and they universalize that to every Jew. And also, I would say this idea of Jews and business. I live in the business community, and I think I've seen non-Jews do not such good things. I've seen Christians do not such good things. I've seen atheists do not such good things.
Of course.
But I don't say all atheists are bad, or I was atheisted down. And that's just, really unfortunate. But I will say this, and I think this is important for your listeners to understand. That's a false accusation, which is different than these anti-Zionist conspiracy theories, which are much worse, because that's having the sense that this false accusation that there's a secret cabal of Jews plotting to steal or plotting to take money from other people. That's even worse.
Well, I've got a little time, and I want to get as much in as I can here, because the book really is fascinating. I mean, how do you see anti-Zionism at play on both the political left and right? And how, may I ask you, has anti-Zionism moved from academic institutions into the culture as a whole? I mean, why are biased professors and extremely ideological theories current? They're so prominent across academic institutions in the United States. To me, that's a worry.
Yep. Well, it is a worry. In the past, whenever there was a revolution in the world, I mean, you can go back to Nazi Germany, you can go back actually to any revolution, whether it was in China. Whenever a communist party or a fascist party took over, the first thing they did was to try to make the universities a place where they could indoctrinate those in their theories and in their constructs. Amazingly, the university system in the United States has been somewhat self-co-opted because of the tenure system. If you are, let's say, far right, and you try to get, and you want all new professors to be just like you, and then they're there literally forever until they drop dead or retire. Well, you can actually make that happen. And what's happened in the United States is that, according to reliable surveys, there are about 12 times as many left-wing folks as right-wing folks on campus. And so the campus has become an echo chamber. And the only way to distinguish yourself is by being more and more extreme when it comes to ideologies and when it comes to, and so the campus has become a place, instead of where new evidence can enlighten or change theories, it's become a place where new evidence can be dismissed because it doesn't follow the appropriate narrative. I mean, if you're in many departments and you're an avowed Zionist, you're not going to get tenure in many places. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. Whereas if you are chanting every other hour from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that's a feather in your cap.
I can't believe what some of them get away with, and yet they get this tenure jazz where you can never be fired. That just amazes me. Scott Shay, what ideas do you have then about how universities can ensure academic integrity in their research and scholarship?
So this is a big question. And I think it goes well beyond the issue of anti-Zionism on campus. I think, first of all, we found, and there's been plenty of evidence of studies, and indeed the majority of studies, there have been retrospective research on whether psychology research papers can be corroborated, whether the experience can be replicated. And in most cases, not just a substantial minority, in most cases, they can't be replicated. John Ioannidis wrote a paper showing just why most academic papers are false and not true. And it could have been written, the title could have been "The Emperor Has No Clothes." There needs to be much more rigorous retesting of theories on campus, and not just with people who are friendly with or sympathetic, should I say, not friendly, but sympathetic with the writer. So I think that, frankly, all research, universities should partner and create networks where, before they allow professors to publish anything, that the results are corroborated. I also think that there needs to be classes. There needs to be at least a required class in the dangers of false theories in academia, because this isn't the first time that this has all happened. I mean, famously, the German university system came to its own reckoning and recognized how, by becoming essentially advocates and propagating the narrative of the Nazi movement, that they caused grave discredit to academia. And there's lots of theories. Additionally, I think finding out where the money's coming from is important. I mean, Qatar donates about $200 million or more a year to U.S. universities in the U.S. And so exactly where and how all the money is flowing is critical. Like, Qatar is the biggest funder of, well, Iran may be bigger, but they're one of the biggest funders of the Hamas movement, which vows to kill, murder, should I say, or expel every Jew from the river to the sea. If you were if a university were considering a donor, and that donor also was donating to, let's say, the Tamil Tigers or the far-right Aryan Society or something like that, their money might not be so acceptable, but universities are pretty eager to take Qatar money.
Yeah, well, there's just a classic example. And I mean, in that age group, too, at universities, they're very impressionable. And, it's not right. But anyway, look, we're going to run out of time here. It's fascinating. The book is going to be great. How long have you been working on Conspiracy U? And what do you really hope will change as a result of writing it, Scott? So
I spent 20 months of all of my discretionary free time writing this book. I wrote it faster than in good faith. Took me 5 years. It was a somewhat bigger book, but I think this topic of false theories, negating facts, is so important right now. I mean, the publisher actually rushed this to some degree to press, because if you look at our current society, we're suffering from this dramatically right now. And I'm hoping, and I say in the book, the Jews here, this is not to minimize the harm being caused to Jews, but the Jews are the canary in the coal mine here. This is not just bad for the Jews. It's bad for the United States of America. It's bad for Western society.
Yeah, that's
and so that's why I think it's important, and that's why I threw myself into writing this book.
Very good analogy. So, great lessons. I mean, what would you like readers to take from your book?
I'd like them to take from my book that the most important thing is the golden rule. The most important thing is to think rather than to just accept whatever your own God King is saying, your own idol is saying, because ultimately everything depends on that. And I also want people, and we're really hoping that universities take note, because and people who fund universities take note of what's happening there. and what the dangers are, and the universities need to be centers of intellectual growth, not indoctrination.
Mm.
We need to teach people how to think, not what to think.
Well, I think you're right about the money, and I think you're right about, see, the problem is it's universities are almost a business now. And when you look at COVID, what it's done in the last 18 months to 2 years, what it's done to universities, well, it sort of says, boy, where are we going to get the dough from? You know, it's scary. Well, folks, there you have it. All the details how to get a copy of the book we're going to talk about. Now, it's on pre-order. Is that right, Scott, at Amazon.com?
It is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and it will be for sale anywhere quality books are sold.
Fantastic. And this would be a hell of a gift, actually. It'd be a very nice gift. I'm going to get one and give it to my father-in-law. He'd love this. So that's really good.
Thank you.
I think good luck with it, mate. I mean, it's a big job. Scott A. Shay, not a virgin author. He's done a couple before that did very well, put a lot of time into this. And, he's a leading businessman, a thought leader, and a distinguished leader in the Jewish community, and very fair. And he is a true son of a Holocaust survivor. So believe me, he knows the Holocaust is real. And a chairman and co-founder of the Signature Bank, a successful organization in America. And the book is called Conspiracy U, as in university. A case study. Heck of a book. Scott's been lovely. Thank you for taking time out on the Mark Bishop Show. I go all over the world, so you never know who can hear this, and good luck with it, okay?
Mark, thank you. You really do. You go deep early, and you really cover just about everything I could say. So thank you very much.
Okay, you're most welcome. Take care.